And thanks very much, everybody, for coming. I appreciate your time. Recognize some of the faces here in the audience, and appreciate everybody joining online. So my name is Chris Dobbin. I'm the founder and CEO at Nova Leap. So Nova Leap is, I'll give you sort of the synopsis here. So Nova Leap's an in-home care. So we provide care to seniors within their home, and primarily to care with those living with dementia. So just the context for how I started the company back in 2016, my father-in-law was diagnosed with Parkinson's. He had progressed over a period of years to the point that we needed home care for him. It was our family's first, experience with home care. Really didn't know much about it before that. And it was an interesting experience. We had some really nice caregivers that came in and provided the care. Probably weren't trained as much as they ought to have been, in providing care to somebody who had dementia, but overall it was a good experience for the family, and so we learned quite a bit for that. Shortly thereafter, we had an opportunity to get into the business, and we did. So if you think about Nova Leap, think about, a loved one, a grandparent, or aunt and uncle, or a spouse that, ends up having some form of need for assistance within the home. That's really what we do. It could be anything from dementia, again, which is what our focus is. Could also be, hip or knee surgery. That's pretty common in the senior population, providing care for post-surgery and things of that nature. So we cover a pretty broad spectrum within the home, but that's the context. Think of care of a loved one within their own home. That's what we do. So I'm going to touch on the industry itself in terms of where we focus, and then also talk about some of the things where we don't focus. This will be, and I'll do that just because of the context. We have Canadian investors, and we have a U.S. investor base, and the system's a little bit different in both countries, so I just want to put it a little bit in perspective. So our focus is on the private pay sector of home care, and primarily in the non-medical side. So non-medical being, activities of daily living, the dementia care, medication reminders, transportation, errands, physician visits. Those are the types of things that qualify as the non-medical side. We do provide some medical care under the direction of nurses, but it's a very small percentage of our business. So we're primarily on the non-medical side. In the U.S., you'll know about, Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement. That is not the business that we're in. So our business, our reimbursement model is private pay primarily, veteran affairs, which is government reimbursement, or long-term care insurance. So we don't play in the Medicare or Medicaid space. It's really the private pay space that's the bulk of our business, and that's been important for us as we've sort of navigated over the last few years. So in terms of the the industry overview, look, I think everybody understands the demographics that we're faced with. So we have an aging population. As a result of an aging population, when someone attains the age of 65, there's generally a high probability that someone is going to have a long-term or chronic condition. And it's the long-term or chronic conditions that lead to the need for care within the home. Okay, so that's really the industry that we're dealing with. It's growing, I think it's 5% a year, probably more than that now, based on I've got some outdated stats there. But I think everybody gets the fact that we have an aging demographic, in Canada, the U.S., and lots of other places in the world that were primarily impacted by the war. We currently operate in 10 states, as well as in Nova Scotia, in Canada. And so we've expanded pretty significantly over the years, and we've done that primarily by way of acquisition. So let me just talk about the business model for a little bit here. So we have locations in Nova Scotia. We're throughout New England, primarily New Hampshire, a number of agencies in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and then we go all the way to sort of Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma. So it's kind of broad right now, but generally 10 states. So what we do is we buy an agency that's been in operations, and I have this, I think, in the next chart. We buy an agency that's been operating for about 10 to 15 years. And this is generally from an owner. Usually it's one owner. Sometimes it might be two owners, but generally from an owner that is looking for retirement. Okay. And I'll say generally, because there are two types of deals, which I'll get into in a second, but been around, owner operated, 10 to 15 year track record. And these businesses are small, like the definition of mom and pop. The average size of revenue for agencies of this type, the private pay agencies in the U.S., whether franchised or independent, generally around $1.8, $1.9 million of revenue, right? So really, really tiny businesses. So we have a collection of those small businesses. There's usually a small office team, so that might be 3 people in an office, right? Could be 4, might be more. I think the most we have is 9, I think, in one of them. And they're limited to sort of a 30-minute geography, generally speaking, okay? So they have clients that they would provide service to within that geography. So the office team is, 3 or 4 people, and then in the field, so those providing the care in the home are the caregivers, and that's generally one-on-one, right? You have one caregiver providing care to a particular client within their home, or we provide care within a facility, but it's the client again that's paying it. So that's really what these businesses look like. We might have 50, 75 caregivers out in the field, okay? So that's what we get when we acquire a business. We have a client base, right? And the average retention rate for clients is about 3 years. We have the employee base, we have the office staff, and then we have that local brand, right? Because they've been operating for 10 or 15 years in that market. So that's what we buy. We're buying the cash flow it's producing. Now, a business may only produce $200,000 cash flow, right? It might produce 250 or 150, like really, really small. So our business model is to take, and if you were to look at each of these businesses on their own, right? And if you were to look back over a 3-year period on their financial statements, you'll look at a business and say, okay, well, that 1 year was $2 million of revenue. The next year, it might be 1.8. The year after that, it might be 2.2. But it's going to be between that 1.8 to 2.2 range if it's been operating for 10 to 15 years. And it's driven by whether or not they're going to have a 24/7 client or not, right? The higher volume type of clients. But they're very consistent businesses, and they all fall within these tiny little ranges. And so what we do is we buy one of these businesses, right, or multiple businesses as we've done in Massachusetts, and we take the cash flow from that business, and because we know it's going to get to a point where it's going to be steady going forward, and then we take that cash flow and then we look to redeploy that to another acquisition, and then we buy another business that's going to be $2 million in revenue and a couple $100,000 EBITDA, and then we'll replicate that over and over. So that's the model of how we take these small, little mom and pop businesses and we grow to a much larger organization. But so this chart shows you where we are right now, which is really what we've done since 2017. And this is kind of what we're looking for. So for this year, for 2024, and I have a shareholder letter, I think that came out probably around March 7th or so, maybe it's the second week of March. And so for those that are interested in the company, I would definitely recommend that you read that. It gives a little bit about the history of where we've come from, and in particular what we're trying to accomplish now. And so in that, I've indicated that, and before we get into financials, so we're sitting right now at around, we've been trending around $1.7 million of EBITDA in US dollars, north of $2 million Canadian. We have no bank debt. Okay, so we are and we trade on the Toronto Venture Exchange as well as OTCQX, best market. So from a TSX Venture perspective, I believe we're in the top 5% of companies, meaning that if you take a look at companies that are cash flow positive and have no bank debt, I believe it's about 5% of the companies. Okay, some of my friends in here can help me confirm that later on. So that's the context. So we plan on growing a couple ways, primarily organic growth this year. So remember I mentioned that we have these companies we acquire, the 1.8 to 2.2 million dollars of revenue, right? They can't kind of get beyond that. So one of the things we found is that the companies that we've acquired that have good sales personnel, they can expand beyond that. All right, they're able to actually do that. And so we're investing more in our sales team for this year, and that's something we really haven't done in the past. We have sales personnel throughout the system, but we really haven't had a concentrated effort in the past to hire salespeople. We're doing that this year. So we're allocating capital to those positions because we do believe it'll make a difference going forward. The second part of that is we'll continue to make acquisitions. And I say continue. From 2017 until the end of 2019, we were really, really active. At one point, we closed 14 acquisitions in 7 months. Up until the end of 2021, we averaged an acquisition per quarter. We stopped at the end of 2021 when we'd made 3 acquisitions over a 2-week period, and we were impacted by the pandemic, right? So we've come out of the pandemic now with record results over the last 3 quarters. Our Q1 2024 results, I think, should come out probably the end of next week, consistent with how we normally do things. But we're back on the acquisition trail. We last week, I think we made an announcement that we're doing a small tuck-in acquisition in Massachusetts, $800,000 of revenue, $100,000 EBITDA, right? Tiny little business, but it's an area that is strategic for us in the state. And we already have, leadership team members that live close by, and we don't believe it's been, the agency's been maximized to its potential. So we have a lot of hopes for that. So again, some of these businesses, you think, what's the point of spending time on these little businesses that are under $1 million of revenue? But we have a couple of businesses that we probably generate as much EBITDA on an annual basis now as what our purchase price was, a few years ago, right? So there is a potential to take these small little businesses that most people would say, what's the point? Why bother, right? Because it's just as much time to buy a small business as it is a big business. That's true, right? Sometimes it's more difficult because you're dealing with unsophisticated sellers. But for us, when we can add a small little business, a little tuck into an area where we already have 4 agencies in the state, and we already have a team in place, and we think we can leverage that team, the technology, and the infrastructure we have, then it makes a lot of sense for us to do it, and so we'll continue to do it. So this chart ahead of you shows the annual revenue from left to right, and then the quarterly revenue, again, from left to right, as well as the annual and quarterly adjusted EBITDA. So the last 3 quarters, we set record results for us on an adjusted EBITDA basis. That was driven primarily by a fairly significant turnaround that we had here in the States. From a management team perspective, so Chris and I run from the head office in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, which is northeast of Maine, which is the northeast of the U.S. And we have a VP operations that handles all of our U.S. operations. So while I'm here talking to you, having fun with you guys, our VP operations has been in the Massachusetts agency that we've just announced we're acquiring, making sure that we're signing up all the people and all the employment documentation and so on and so forth. So we really have a good team that allows us to implement our strategy going forward. There are 6 directors on the board, 5 of whom are independent. I'm obviously not independent, with a mix of business skills and entrepreneurship. And so this deck is available on our website, so you can always go back and take a look at that. Our cap table is in front of you. We're roughly a $20 million Canadian market cap right now. We are roughly a $15 million US market cap on the OTC QX. And again, we've been trending around 1.7 million US of EBITDA and north of 2 million Canadian, and we've paid off all of our bank debt. And the bank debt we paid off was all acquisition-related debt. So as we've made the acquisitions in over the years, we leveraged up. And so we're in a great position now to go back into the market and start acquiring these businesses, and we'll do that with debt, right? That's what we'll leverage back. So the business that we just acquired, or that we're acquiring, which will close either this week or next week, again, $800,000, $100,000 of EBITDA. We're acquiring it for $300,000 in total, so 3 times EBITDA, $250,000 up front, $50,000 over 2 years, promissory note, 5% interest rate. So basically, with one quarter of our EBITDA, we can acquire a business for with cash, right? No debt. right? So again, good little tuck in for us. I think that's probably, we do have one analyst that covers us out of Canada, but that's probably it. So in summary, I'd like to think that we're in the top 5% of the TSX Venture exchange companies, just given our cash flow profile and the fact that we don't have any debt. We have in the past been a serial acquirer of these businesses. We put a pause since the end of 2021. We are back in the market acquiring these small home care businesses. We've just made one announcement, which we expect to close later this week or next week, and we plan on doing more in 2024. So my anticipation is that we'll be pretty active on the acquisition front for the remainder of the year. I said in my shareholder letter, which I referenced earlier, that internally we were really focused on getting the business to a point where we're generating at least $450 of quarterly EBITDA. And again, we report in US dollars. These are all US dollars I'm referring to. We've done that. And so now we're really trying to get to 750 as our next level, or $3 million, annualized US EBITDA. That's really where our focus is. And I haven't given a timeline for that, obviously, but that's where our focus lies right now, and I think that's quite achievable for us. So I'll stop there and be happy to take any questions either from the audience or from those, I guess, online they can't ask. But so anyone here in the audience. Happy.
You've mentioned that it's not by more salespeople. What are your expectations in terms of maybe ROI?
Yeah, so the question is that I mentioned we're hiring more salespeople, and what's the expectation in terms of ROI? So I would say a minimum of 25% per year is what we're really looking for if you measure it in terms of ROI. So you take what we would be compensating these people versus what we can drive in the market in terms of returns, and that's kind of how we look at that. And if we don't think we can get that, then it's probably not the right salesperson for us. So that would be the minimum that we'd be looking to achieve.
Follow up that. So like if you're aiming for 25%, that means the payback would be like 4 years.
No. So if someone were making, no, it's on top of their salary. It's a plus. It's not. It's on top of their all-in cost. Sorry, that's a better way to reference it. So the follow-up question for those that are online was, is that a 25% relative to the annual investment? And no, that's not what I'm referring to. So it's the return to the company after the all-in costs. Appreciate the clarification. Yeah. Yes.
Your view on using your shares currency to support your revenue strategy.
Yeah, so the question is, what's my view on using shares as currency to support the M&A strategy? And so my view is we don't have to do that because we're generating, because we're cash flow positive and we have no bank debt whatsoever. That allows us leverage. And so our view as a management team is that we can make acquisitions with bank debt like we did in the past, and that's the right thing to do for the company and for shareholders, right? And the debt that we've generally looked at in the past is going up to 3.5 times EBITDA. That hasn't changed for us. And so as we add more of these companies, right, under the umbrella, if we're successful with that and we keep adding more EBITDA, then in theory that allows us access to more leverage, which then allows us to do more deals, right? So the trick here is to be successful on integrating with the acquisitions that we do, right? Any other questions? Awesome. My favorite part of the presentation. I need some more. Yeah, go ahead.
Follow up. In terms of, I know these are smaller, not in acquisitions, but do you run into issues where, founders, the owner managers are buying business from in sort of keeping them committed, or is the effectively their payout structure stack?
Yeah, great question. So the question is how we lock up founders of the selling businesses, post acquisition, right? And so we look at two types of deals. In the first type of deal, it's purely succession planning. They're looking to exit. We don't want them as part of the business because they're not actually motivated to grow the business anymore. They've attained a period in their life where they've said, like, I'm kind of out, I'm done, I'm tired, and so I'd like someone else to take the business from this point forward. And so in that situation, we look at, is there somebody internally that we think we could elevate to a more senior position to grow the business in the area? And oftentimes there is, probably about 75% of the time, there is somebody we can identify. The other 25% of the time, we have to bring somebody externally and hire that person. The second type of transaction we look at would be more like what you guys would consider to be a private equity type transaction. So you might have somebody that's a little bit younger and does want to continue to grow that business, but they're either lacking capital or strategy, but they're looking for some sort of partner to sponsor that. And so we have had discussions under those types of circumstances, but really haven't found the right type of opportunity for that. And so in that type of situation, we would look to lock them up because they'd be selling a piece of the business to us now with a view of selling the second bite of the apple, down the road, right? So typical sort of PE type of deal, we'd look at doing those as well. Yeah, I'll come back to you in a second. Go ahead. What kind of banking relationship? Right. So two-part question. The first is how do we source our deals, and the second is just how's our banking relationship. With regard to sourcing deals, we do not employ a broker. We do reach out. So we have an in-house team that reaches out on a regular basis, and so more proprietary sort of deal flow. There are brokers that know us because we've been a good buyer, pretty active buyer in the U.S. marketplace, and so we do receive opportunities on a fairly regular basis. The opportunity we just announced in Massachusetts is an example of one. This broker we know well. We haven't done a deal with him in the past, but he knows us, and we've known him for years. There's a couple of major industry conferences that we attend that lead to opportunities. Those discussions sometimes are shorter, sometimes they're longer term. And then the sellers of the businesses, if they've had a good experience with us, and I think most have, they sort of speak to their peer network. So those are the four main ways in which we source our deals. And look, we're never going to run out of deal flow. It's just there's too much. These are like thousands of these independent, non-franchised home care businesses. Like I don't think it's possible we could run out of deals. I think if we didn't have a good reputation, we may not get access to some deals, but I think that's probably the biggest risk. The second part of your question around the banking relationship is great. Like we have a bank out of Canada, one of the largest banks in the country, that has banked us on all of our deals where we've asked in the past. And you think about a company that's borrowed millions of dollars from them to make the acquisitions and has paid back every penny. That's pretty good. And so they'll continue to support us going forward, as long as we continue to execute, obviously. How would you know? Well, so the follow-up question is how big is our line right now for acquisition? So we actually don't have an acquisition line. That's probably a next step for us. What we've done in the past is we've had separate acquisition facilities each time. Because again, we started with, in 2016, our revenue was like $40,000. So it's kind of risky for the bank to get involved with us. So that's the next step for us. Yeah, Matthew, back.
Yeah, but actually, to follow up on the banking relationship, it seems like it's been the year or two more in deleveraging mode instead of doing more acquisitions. So is that the nature of how your debt was structured, that made you have to deliver at this point instead of keeping some debt on the capital structure?
Yeah, so the question was, sort of, our focus has been on deleveraging over the past couple of years, and sort of what was, why were we sort of doing that versus M&A? That's right. So if you take a look at sort of the quarterly EBITDA, there's a period within. So one, the way our bank debt was structured, each facility had a term. So it was basically like all of them were a 5, with the exception of one at a 7-year term. And so this was principal and interest paid back every month on schedule, right? So that's how all the facilities were set up. I think we had 5 facilities. And if you look at, COVID impacted our business, right? It's pretty clear. Like you can see the line where we went down, right? And then we sort of have come back up out of that. And so deleveraging for us made sense because a year ago, the performance wasn't where it should have been, right? And so we were deleveraging at the same time that we were very much focused on operations. And anyone that sort of follows us can go back to my 2022 commentary in our press releases. You'll see that I was saying this is what we need to do. This is what we're doing. And then over the last 3 quarters, you've seen that's what we did. We delivered on the changes that we made. And so now it's kind of the best of both worlds, right? We're in the best financial situation we've ever been in, and we have no debt. So for us as a company, it just made sense to follow that strategy. So as long as we continue to execute as we have over the last year, and the deals that we're buying are good, then we'll be in a great position going forward from a debt perspective, which is why, come back to the gentleman's comment earlier, we're not really looking at using our share currency whatsoever, right? Yeah.
Who is your competition and why their shares are getting?
So the question around competition, you're not asking competition to acquire companies, you're asking like local competition for services. But like at the local level, providing the service of home care. Yeah. So the question is like, who do we compete with at the local level for home care? It would be mostly franchises. So think, Home Instead, which is the largest home care franchise system in the world. Comfort Keepers in certain locations, but mostly they would be franchise systems that we would compete with. 75% of the businesses would be franchise systems. And the larger the center, the more competition there would be. So in the more rural areas where we are, like in rural Oklahoma, we would be like the number 1 or number 2 player. And then in other markets that are much larger, like in Boston, which we entered a few years ago, like, we're tiny in comparison to some others. So that's the opportunity for us to grow. 1 minute left if there's any final questions. Shoot, go ahead. I'm seeing you tomorrow. No, go. You're good. You're good. So the question is, what was the most important lesson I learned over the last few years? People, right? The right people in the right management positions. As simple as that. We got them. If we do a good job at that local level, we're golden. Thanks very much. Really appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference.